is Maria Jolicoeur. I'd like to welcome you to my show. The title is Let's Talk About History. I am a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Faith Trumbull chapter, located at 42 Rockwell Street in Norwich. We are a women's organization that promotes education and patriotism, and women 18 years of age and older are eligible for membership. If you have an ancestor who served or assisted in the war, the Revolutionary War of 1776. As my guest today, I would like to introduce Norwich historian Dale Plummer. Hello, Dale.
Hi, Maria.
How are you today?
Oh, happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today on our Talk About History. I wanted to ask you a few questions about your title as Norwich historian.
Sure.
How did you become involved in Norwich history and Norwich historian? Were you interested in Norwich history? Did you, when you went to college, did you major in history?
Well, I've been interested in history since I was a child. Of course, my mother is into genealogy and family history, but also into Connecticut and local.
She was in the DAR also.
She's also
yes.
a DAR member, yes, as was my grandmother. So we had that interest in the family from an early period, and it also turns out that my great grandfather came to Norwich from Scotland in 1885 to work for Reed and Hughes. And his Scottish wife died, and he married a local girl, so who was descended, in fact, from one of the original settlers of Norwich.
So what does your job entail for Norwich as Norwich historian?
Well, the technical title is municipal historian, and the state set up a program where each town in the state could appoint a municipal historian at no cost. It's not a funded position. There's no salary involved.
So it's volunteer mainly?
It's totally volunteer.
But we do need a historian. Norwich is celebrating its 350th anniversary this year.
Yes.
And Norwich is one of the oldest cities in the nation, so we're in need of a historian in this city. You have walking tours, don't you? I'd like to know when your next walking tour you're planning on having and where it's going to be.
Well, I'm going to be doing a series of walking tours for the 350th anniversary.
When is their next walking tour?
That would be actually in June.
In June. And where is that going to be?
There's going to be a number of different walking tours. Mohegan Park, there's going to be the Washington Street area, the Falls area, the Antic Cemetery, and so forth. And a number of different people are going to be giving those, not just me. I don't have enough time to devote to it, to do all those walking tours, but it will give a good idea of the history of the city. We'll also be doing some skits, some little dramatic presentations about the history of the town too. So it should be, a good celebration. I'm looking forward to it. We'll have churches open to the public.
Now, Norwich is known for its history, for being a very old city. Could you tell us what some of the families, the early settlers, when they arrived in Norwich, what year were they known for settling in Norwich? And did they come from another state like Massachusetts or Rhode Island?
Well, the initial settlement of Norwich was by settlers from Saybrook. They were already formed into a group. They petitioned the General Assembly for permission to start a new settlement. in the colonial period, you just didn't go out into the wilderness and start a settlement. You had to have the permission of the General Assembly. So they got permission, and then they negotiated with the Mohegans, with Uncas, and in 1659 purchased this approximately 9-mile by 9-mile piece of land near the seat of the Mohegans. Settlement started in 1659, but the real influx of settlers didn't come until 1660.
Now,
there was a crew that stayed over the winter of 1659 to 1660, basically preparing the way for the larger group that came in 1660. So yes, we were founded in 1659, which makes us now 350 years old. The semi-septennial.
Do you know of any ceremonies that are coming up that are going to mark the celebration of
Probably
our 350th anniversary?
the biggest one will be actually a sort of a recreation of the original signing of the deed to Norwich, and that will be at City Hall. It will be during that celebration week.
Now, which Indian tribe was that from that they...
Well, the Mohegans.
Oh, the Mohegans. It was the Mohegans.
Right,
yeah.
because the Pequots didn't actually... When the Pequots lost the Pequot War, their land was taken from them.
Okay.
It was never paid for. The Pequots... the English claim to the Pequot homeland was that of the ancient English right of conquest. Basically, we beat you, we're taking your land.
Oh, I see.
So there was
so
never...
there's going to be a reenactment of that event?
But of the event of the sale by the Mohegan tribe to the English.
And when is that going to be?
That will be in June.
June. Where is that going to take place?
City Hall.
City Hall. Okay.
And the calendar is being published, so people will be able to refer to that. I don't have the exact date right in front of me, but it should be the third week,
so we'll look for
fourth
that.
week in June.
We'll look for that coming up.
Yep.
I know that there's going to be a parade in July that's going to mark celebration, 350th anniversary of Norwich. There's also going to be another reenactment in Norwich town.
Right.
That's going to be in June.
Right, that's part of 350th, and that will be a variety of reenactors from various historic periods. So it'll be from the colonial period up through the 19th and even the early 20th century.
Okay.
And the Vietnam Wall Memorial will also be here as part of the 350th.
Wonderful.
The reproduction of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington.
So now, what were some of the skills that were needed by the early settlers in Norwich? What were some of the trades?
Well, the most critical skills were things like blacksmithing. Blacksmithing was essential because you needed to make and repair tools, plows, horseshoes, other tools like axes, adzes, and so forth. The Backus family were actually practitioners of blacksmithing, and William Backus, who died very soon after the settlement, actually was apparently a blacksmith. He had tools that were listed in his inventory. So, and the Backus family actually constructed an ironworks to make iron from iron ore in the vicinity of the village of Yantic, near where the Yantic mill is. They were producing iron hardware and so forth right up through the colonial period.
So now a lot of their items needed to be imported from other countries. Their homeland, their motherland, England, for instance.
Right.
Well, was the harbor used a great deal for the goods that were needed in Norwich at the time?
Well, I think originally when the first settlement occurred, Norwich didn't have much capability in terms of making things. So what they did was they imported most of their items. But with the Bacchus ironworks, with the forests in the area, and the fact that you were right on the river. Shipbuilding became an important local enterprise. Grinding grain into flour.
So they needed a lot of their materials imported in
Yes.
while they were first settling here in Norwich.
But I think over the years what happened was they began to make more and more because they, for one thing, they saw the advantage of using water power. So for instance, the Antic River, or the Little River as they called it in the colonial period, the Antic River was used for a grist mill, was used for an oil mill, or oil mills actually, which crushed linseed, flaxseed, made it into oil, which was useful for paints and preservatives. They had 1766, Christopher Leffingwell started his paper mill.
So now did the group of families come together from another part of the country, from Massachusetts, or will you say from Saybrook? Did they come as a group, some of them?
Well, the first initial group of settlers came from Saybrook.
Okay.
They'd already been in Connecticut for some time.
Okay.
And among those were John Mason, my ancestor, who'd come in the 1630s, had been the major figure in the Pequot War, had moved to Saybrook from Windsor to be in charge of the fort. At Saybrook, a critical military point because the fort guarded the entrance to the Connecticut River and the towns up the river, Hartford, Wethersfield, Windsor. So when Uncas sold the land to these settlers from Saybrook, he had in mind that having an English settlement nearby, especially one where Mason was one of the leading figures, would protect him from the Narragansetts, his enemies. So there was an element of that in there. Then later, settlers came in from Massachusetts and Rhode Island. One of the advantages Norwich had was being on the water. People could come here by water much more easily than, by land.
Right. So the harbor was used quite a bit for ways of transportation, bringing in, importing what they needed while they were...
Right. It was really, without the river, there wouldn't have been a settlement here. And of course, the thing is that Norwich developed as a rival of New London. New London was at the, well, it wasn't known for whaling at the time. New London in the colonial period was an important port for coastal trade and for West Indies trade. And they would exchange horses, cattle, mules, and so forth, onions, wood products, pre-cut lumber to the West Indies. And they would bring back rum, molasses, sugar, and also slaves.
Okay.
So this area developed a good-sized African-American population early on because of that trade. But Norwich, being at the head of the Thames River, cut off a lot of the trade that New London might have had, and Norwich began to grow and prosper at New London's expense. So Norwich and New London were always rivals.
Oh, I see. All right. Speaking of slaves, did you ever